So you'd see a dear deterioration in all of the empires, all the gunpowder empires during this period for a series of reasons. The first one, looking at it from the Ottoman perspective, is they became lazy through luxury. Selim the Sot and Abraham the Crazy, the Sot being lazy, crazy speaks for itself. They would essentially isolate themselves from any problems that were occurring in the empire. In fact, they would, spend most of their time in harems, which were kind of like your places where the princes and kings or emperors or princes could, you know, essentially have their sexual pleasures satisfied by women they brought from all over their empires. They essentially didn't care about administering the empire. All they cared about was fulfilling their desires and not dealing with political issues. It was quite bad for the Ottoman Empire for a long period, or a very long period of time. So they essentially isolate themselves. There were also religious tensions between them and conservatives across their empire. Um, Even liberals. So conservatives and liberals in the empires would have conflict with one another. A lot of it kind of centered on the role of women in Ottoman society. In Ottoman society, women were given a lot of political power, even if it wasn't outright in front of everybody. And a lot of the conservatives in the country did not agree with this because they felt as though women shouldn't have that type of political power. And a lot of this conflict, religious conflict, stemmed from Saudi Arabia, which was part of the Ottoman Empire. The Wahhabi movement, which is still quite popular in Saudi Arabia today and spreading across the world. The Wahhabi movement in Arabia denounced the Ottomans as unfit to rule. They said, look, you guys, you're not conservative enough. You're not enforcing Islam enough. Women are too powerful in society. They protested the construction of a astronomical observatory in Istanbul and ordered it destroyed. They said the printing press should be closed in 1742, which they regarded as impious. So very conservative and in constant conflict with the imperial leadership in the Ottoman Empire. In fact, a lot of them would join the Janissary Corps and lead to severe conflict with the Ottomans. The Safavid Shiites would persecute Sunnis and non-Muslims, even Sufis, across their empire. So you'd see conflict, religious conflict, between zealous conservative Islamic people and those who are a little bit more liberal and loose about their interpretations of things. So again, here's an example of the Imperial Decadence. This is, you see the men in the corner, those are your imperial, princes, and the women around them are essentially there to satisfy the pleasures of the princes. This is what a harem was. Quite an awful place. And a lot of these women were taken from the Caucasus regions and the Balkans, places they had conquered. So there was also economic and military decline. So foreign trade would essentially be controlled by Europeans. It was a one-way street. Europeans would come in, establish trading outposts in the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire, and the Safavid Empire, but there wasn't much trade going back the other way. The Muslim empires, the gunpowder empires, weren't looking to establish trade in other parts of the world. They felt like, oh, we got everything. And that leads to economic decline. You can't just have imports and no exports. Or you can't just have exports that you're sending out to them and not be getting things from other places to sell. Military and administrative network became expensive, so as you're expanding your empires, think about Rome, think about the Hellenistic empires. As you expand, it becomes quite costly. So there was a point in the Ottoman Empire where they debased their coins, basically put less valuable metal into the coin and used, cheap metals and gave that to the Janissaries. The Janissaries, as you would probably understand, were quite ticked off about this. So they revolted. And a lot of this was because their economies were pretty much in shambles. They also were involved in several unproductive wars, all of them. The unproductive war that the Ottomans would be involved in would be the war against the Habsburgs, who were kind of your Western Roman Empire as they looked to move into Western Europe. They were just outgunned. Central Europe. The Habsburgs are in Central Europe. They were outgunned and just could not keep up with them. And the technology was because of the technology. So the Europeans were, exporting all their technology to the Ottomans and to the Safavids and to the Mughals, and they were old stuff. So the Ottomans, especially, would continue to purchase it, uh, but it was this outdated technology. So the Europeans were able to push the Ottomans further east and expel them from a lot of their original territory later in their history. So this is its. You can see, all the boundaries, kind of at the height of the Ottoman Empire, and that would slowly start to kind of degrade and move in as the Europeans surpassed them in their technology. And a lot of this had to do with the cultural conservatism that existed in the Ottoman Empire, in their insular nature. The Europeans actively were willing to study Islamic culture. They went there, studied their technology, studied their what they did and how they did things in the Islamic world, their mathematical concepts, their ability to weave, all those things. And they also expanded missionary activities into these regions rather unsuccessfully. But they were willing to study Islamic culture and Islamic society, whereas the Islamic world was less willing to do so. They saw the Franks, as it says on page 692, they saw the Frankish people in Western Europe as the infidel lands, so they were unwilling to go there. They were confident in their superiority and believed that they had nothing to learn from the Europeans. So, yeah, the Europeans are passing you by, guys. You might want to learn a thing or two from them. So the Islamic empires became less interested in the outside world, and they fell behind technologically. And thus, here's an example. The Jewish people would actually bring the printing press to Anatolia or Turkey in the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century. So they were unwilling to adopt it. It would have to be from the Jewish people and the Jewish communities that would bring these technologies, and they would actually be destroyed by the Wahhabi movement in Saudi Arabia. But printing of books in Turkish and Arabic was actually forbidden until 1729. So they wouldn't actually begin to use they would handwrite everything. So you would see weak levels of dissemination of knowledge throughout the empire. So they're holding themselves back with their cultural conservatism. And in your textbook, it makes a comparison that they're a lot like Imperial China. They're a lot like Tokugawa Japan. It's like, guys, you have to adopt these practices in Europe or you're going to get taken over. And sure enough, they would. It would take a little longer for the Ottomans, but they would eventually be taken over by Europeans in a lot of ways, except for Turkey. So, insular nature of empires and the unwillingness to adopt new technologies, the unwillingness to open yourself up to others is going to lead to your downfalls. And this led to the downfall of the Ottomans. This would lead to the downfall of the Chinese, which we're going to see soon. And it would lead to the downfall, which you probably have read about already, of Tokugawa Japan with the arrival of the Americans and Admiral Commodore Perry, Matthew Perry, not the guy from Friends. But insular nature, no good for empires, and that's what led to the downfall of these empires. So again, consider some of the things we talked about. What makes these places empires? What do they do to the cultures of the places they conquer? What do they do to the economic, or how do they, organize themselves economically? How do they promote their religion in certain areas that they conquer? How do they administer their empires? And through what means do they expand their empires? So be considering all those things as we move forward in this project.